And with me today on Politics Live, the Shadow Education Minister, Tracy Brabin, a Conservative MP, Gillian Keegan, Stephen Gethins from the SNP, and Camilla Tominey, Associate Editor at The Telegraph. Today, a major leak on the private discussions of the government's National Security Council about Chinese firm Huawei. The chair of the Intelligence Committee is deeply worried.
If it turned out that it was a member of the cabinet, or indeed a minister who was attending the NSC, they should be sacked immediately.
We'll be discussing why knife crime in England and Wales has risen to record levels. And also, Jeremy Corbyn takes the wheel on the buses. He's pledged over £1 billion to reverse cuts to bus routes. And 4-year-olds are out protesting with their parents to stop government plans to test them when they start school.
You can see how little they are, and I don't think it's appropriate, and I think we shouldn't be doing it.
So all that coming up on the day that Joe Biden has announced his third bid for the Democratic nomination, presidential nomination. He failed in 1987. That was after he basically plagiarized a speech from Neil Kinnock. And he failed again in 2008. Mr. Obama got that Democratic nomination and, of course, the White House. He was elected to the Senate in 1972. It's only a year after I left university. He's 76. We'll see how he does this time. Back here in Blighty, the leak from the confidential meeting of the National Security Council. How can the government, given that, how can it avoid an official inquiry now? Gillian Keegan, how can it avoid an official inquiry?
I'm not sure it should avoid an official inquiry.
You're PPS of the Defence Secretary.
I am, and I think it's absolutely vital that the NCS is, is secure and leaks do not come out of it. And I'm sure Gavin would absolutely say the same if he was sat here right now. So if there has been a leak, which it seems that there has...
Well, there must have been a leak.
There must have been, and actually, from what I understand, the person who wrote the story is also already, obviously will have a source. So, if there has been a leak, then somebody is going to have to be accountable for that. And it's vital that things that are discussed in the National Security Council stay secure.
Especially now that the cabinet leaks like a sieve. So well, you've got to have some more institution that doesn't leak.
I think that's true. I mean, it's the cabinet shouldn't leak either, but I think it's vital because there's a different level of things that are discussed in the national.
Oh, I understand. This is all the intelligence briefings are given.
And if you cannot keep them secure, then that is very serious.
And Gillian Keegan, Labour has, Tracy Brabin, Labour has called for an inquiry.
Well, absolutely. I think it's deeply troubling. I mean, national security must be our #1 priority. And if this is just going to be some sort of political football for someone who's trying to get to be the Prime Minister, we have to find out who it is.
It's alleged.
Yeah, who is it? And they should be fired immediately.
Yep. Stephen Gethins, Jeremy Wright, the Culture Secretary, he's called for a criminal inquiry. In fact, we could hear him. Let's just hear what he had to say, and I'll come back to you.
We cannot exclude the possibility of a criminal investigation here, and everybody will want to take seriously that suggestion. But I think we are all entitled to say what I think many of us have already said about the undesirability of this kind of leak, and it's perfectly proper for the House to express its concern in the way it has.
Well, that's the Culture Secretary. As Culture Secretary, he's not exactly at the heart of the national security military complex, but even so, he's raised the prospect of a criminal inquiry. What do you think of that?
I think he's right to give it to consideration. I mean, let's not lose sight of the seriousness of this. This is a leak from the national security, and I think Tracy and Gillian were right to highlight the seriousness. Now, I sincerely hope, believe it or not, in spite of the political gains that might be there to have, that this is not a politician who's leaking it. If it is, that is incredibly serious because this crumbling government are now impacting on national security, having national security implications as well. So I hope that's not the case. I think Mr. Wright is quite correct in what he says. And
he has a dog in the fight because he is in charge of the 5G rollout.
He is.
Which is this new, going to be super fast system for mobile technology.
And there are significant concerns around that. I mean, there was a Foreign Affairs Committee report that highlighted some of those concerns that came out just a couple of weeks ago. But I think what he said today is correct. I sincerely hope that it isn't a politician. I think if it is, it's very, very serious, and that person
Well, they couldn't
should be
survive.
sacked. No, they couldn't survive. But I think it also shows that we've got a government that's losing control at the moment, and those consequences are far-reaching.
Well, it doesn't show that until we know who did it.
It doesn't show it until it shows it.
Could
But
have been an official, but also I saw some speculation it may be part of a particular Tories leadership bid.
Well, it could be. Look,
who knows?
I hope, and I've said to you before, I hope that this isn't a politician, but it'll be very serious. They couldn't survive, and I'm really glad to hear that I'm on the same page as Tracy and Gillian on this as well.
I'm not, because I'd like to have some difference of a bid. It's like a one-party state so far.
I'm sure we'll find some differences in a minute.
I'm sure.
Camilla, it's your paper got this scoop, in effect. I guess as journalists, we have to be a little bit careful about stirring the inquiry pot here.
Sure.
Particularly criminal inquiries, because that'll put extra pressures on journalists to reveal sources.
Well, journalists at the Telegraph aren't going to reveal any sources. This was a leak. I'm a journalist. I welcome leaks. The leak was in the public interest, you could very vehemently argue, because it's concerning 5G and suggestions that the Chinese, if this contract is granted to Huawei, could be able to spy on our own intelligence. So I think it's a serious and legitimate story which Telegraph readers will be interested in. Naturally, it's been followed up. With regard to party discipline in general, I mean, this idea of people being fired, there's probably not much public support for that idea, because so far over the last year or so we've seen no collective ministerial responsibility taken for anything. It's good to see Dominic Grieve there calling for heads to roll when there's been reports of him conspiring with Speaker Bercow. So discipline is completely broken down.
That's very different. I mean, we're talking about an issue of national security, and I'm not going to defend the government, but it's quite different when you get leaks on points of policy, squabbling on points of policy. That is damaging enough.
But
That's already damaging.
The damage?
But
what's the damage?
Well, the damage
to
is,
our national security.
I'll tell you what.
We
Andrew,
now know that it's government policy, seems to be government policy, to involve Huawei in our 5G rollout. What's the, if that is government policy, what's the damage to national security that we now know that?
The damage is not in debating that. And as I said, look, I'm a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and we had a full-length
but what's the damage in national security? No, there's an argument whether this is right or not. But what's the damage to national security that the British people now know that the government intends to involve this massive Chinese technology company in our 5G?
But it was something that was already a discussion and debate about. I think it's from where it's come, the National Security Council. Now, I think intelligence officials and civil servants and others should feel that they are able to discuss issues of national security in privacy, given the importance of that. And I have to say, Camilla, to compare that with, Dominic Grieve looking at... No, I think, no, you were comparing it.
I was saying,
no, Dominic Grieve looking at parliamentary process over this mess of Brexit. I don't think you can compare them.
I'm using an example of party ill-discipline throughout the whole of the Conservatives, in the sense of you've got MPs like Dominic Grieve on one hand freelancing on Brexit, and there were reports,
We were going to try and make this a Brexit. We were going to try and make this a Brexit. We were going to try and make this a Brexit-free programme.
Can I finish my point?
We didn't get through the first 5 minutes of it. This is a perfect Brexit-free.
You've got a situation where Theresa May's own chief of staff was accused of telling Remainer cabinet ministers they could rebel against their own party whip. You've got a total and utter lack of ministerial responsibility from the transport secretary.
Dominic's not a minister.
For everything else. So we're talking in general. You're saying, oh, heads must roll on this.
And we are now going to talk about something else. No, we're going to talk about something else. I'll leave hanging there what the damage to national security has been, as opposed to the damage of the proceedings of the National Security Council. They may be two different things. One of the issues we want to talk about today is testing in primary schools, testing even before children get to primary schools. There's a plan now to bring testing in at 4, I think probably to establish a benchmark when the children then get to primary school. We're going to get a bit more explanation on that. There's a protest taking place in Parliament Square. Teachers, parents, and I think maybe even some 4-year-olds too, are protesting against this idea. Let's go to our reporter, John Owen. He's in Parliament Square. John.
Hi, Andrew. Yes, as you can see, four-year-olds and their parents congregating here in Parliament Square. They're planning to deliver a 65,000-strong petition to Downing Street, calling on the government, as you say, to scrap plans to introduce tests for 4- and 5-year-olds as they start primary school. I'm joined by Catherine and her little boy Milo. Hello, Catherine.
Hi.
Hello, Milo.
Hello.
And I'm also joined by Merica, who is a primary school teacher. Hi.
Hello.
So, Catherine, first of all, what exactly is it that you're worried about? What brings you to Parliament Square today?
I think the idea of testing 4-year-olds when in their first few weeks of schools seems insane to me. It's a really important time of their life when they should be focusing on making friends and navigating this new system, working out how to get their lunch and how to get the loo on their own. And they're being taken out of the classroom and being tested. It's putting stress on them. It's putting stress on the teacher. That's just not necessary.
Okay, the government says that it's an assessment, so not strictly speaking a test. And just between you and I, they say that the children shouldn't even necessarily know that a test is going on. So surely it's harmless in that respect.
Well, it's taking time out of the classroom. So it's taking children out of the classroom, and importantly, it's taking teachers out of the classroom. So if there's a class of 30 children, half an hour each, that's up to 15 hours in which teachers are out of the classroom in those precious first weeks of school. So I think it's a short test, but it's have a massive impact on children's first few weeks at school.
Okay, and Merica, as a primary school teacher, surely this is helpful to have a simple, standard baseline test so you can assess where a child's up to as they start school.
No, these tests are unhelpful, unnecessary and unreliable. As an early years teacher anyway, we already do a baseline assessment, but the high stakes pressure and accountability regime that goes throughout the school and the whole high stakes testing culture isn't applicable, and we shouldn't be having that on our children. It should be the time where we're spending the time building the relationships up with those children, working with them in the areas so that we get the most from those children.
Okay, but isn't it really essential for schools and teachers to be able to measure the progress of a child as they move through school? And the only way to do that is to know what their starting point is.
Well, yes, we do a baseline anyway. However, it's not one that the government have inflicted upon us. It's one that we feel is robust and strong, and we use school-to-school peer moderation to ensure that the data that we've got is accurate. And you can't possibly compare the data from the reception cohort to the Year 6 SATs results because there's movement between schools. The children you test may not even be in your Year 6 class. The children in your Year 6 class may not have done your reception baseline.
Okay, and Milo, if I could just have a word with you. Did you make this sign?
Me and Mum made it.
Okay, it's really nice. Did you do this colouring?
Yes.
And what kind of things do you enjoy doing at school? What's your favourite class?
Rabbit class.
Okay, thanks everyone. Thanks so much. Really appreciate your time. Andrew, back to you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. Gillian Keegan, why test 4-year-olds?
Well, as they said, it's an assessment, and they do already do an assessment, and I think it is quite important. If you look at the difference of children as they come into school, and I've certainly seen this, I've been back to lots of schools in Knowsley where I'm from, and you know there are some children entering school that can barely speak very well, so you need to understand and assess children so you can understand how to give them the best education and experience that they need. All children arrive very differently in school. You know, I can see myself in terms of children and how they develop. So it's an assessment. They do it anyway. I think one of the things in the film there that came out was it seems to be there is this baseline. It is an assessment. The children don't actually know it's happening. It's there to basically assess all the early development needs and where they are on that scale. But I guess it's the accountability and it's who's seeing that and how it's then going to be measured in terms of going forward, which is the concern you're hearing now. And I think, you know, that's another part of the concern around SATs. I think for me, you can understand, you know, there's a very compelling message, you know, testing children being worried. No child should ever be worried or feel they're being assessed age 4 or even be worried about tests age 6 or even 11. The whole point of these is really to make sure that the standards of our education deliver a good standard of education to children so that when they get to primary school, they're not behind. Because I think, you know, under Labour, 1 in 3 kids were reaching secondary school without being able to read and write properly. And that is not going to be the right thing going forward. And don't forget, globally, we're competing. These children are competing for jobs globally now. And the talent pool...
Not so far.
No, but what they do at 4 and what they do at 6 and what they do at 11 all feeds into where you get to at 16, where you get to at 18.
Let me make that point
you need
too.
the right support
let me
all the
bring
way
in
through.
Tracy Brabin, because your shadow responsibility is early years.
It
so
is.
This is a subject that must be of interest to you. Are these tests and subsequent tests, are they really tests of the pupils? Or are they tests of the schools? Are they there to try and measure if the school is doing a good job?
I think what's been happening is teaching to the test. And actually, Gillian, what your point about every child is different actually validates why we should get rid of them. And I have to rush off later just to quickly join the children.
Why?
Because taking a child out who may be a summer baby, so a year behind others, and giving them quite an exacting 20-question test on an iPad, I think is stressful when they should be actually settling in, finding out where the toilets are, afraid that they've left their parents behind, and actually putting that pressure on our brilliant early years staff that they're having to do this. Obviously, this is just a pilot.
How will we know they're brilliant unless we have some way of measuring their brilliance?
Yeah, but this is just a pilot, and actually the
child's needs.
Durham University, that was part of the pilot in the previous year, says this is verging on the immoral, and the schools that took part last year were offered to take part again for free, and have actually said no.
But if we don't understand that, if we don't do this, if we don't do it this way, and I understand Labour, you're not just against this, you're against the ones at 7 are being phased out, I understand anyway, but the ones at 11 will continue, and you want to get rid of them too. So how will we judge a school's performance if we get rid of these tests? What would the alternative be?
What we're saying is we're not buying into the idea of pitting school against school, so that children over the Easter break are prepping for SATs and actually not engaging in a broad and balanced curriculum. These are high stakes, high stress.
But that wasn't my question. My question was, if we don't go down this road...
We trust our teachers to develop assessments. As on your film, you saw peer-to-peer assessments, school to school.
So they get to mark their own homework?
Well, that they will develop in the same way that Finland do, and Finland are in the top of the PISA rankings for reading and science.
Well, I think they've fallen a bit in recent years, but I'll put that aside. But there's no external measure of how well a school is performing. The teachers themselves get to mark their own homework. So if I was making a car, a Range Rover, a Jaguar Land Rover, there would be no external test of how well I'd made this car. I would get to say, "Ooh, I've done very well, that's a good car."
No, we're not saying that people should just put their feet up and say we're an amazing school. What you're saying is we're going to lower the stakes of these assessments by making them, we'll develop it with the teachers and the heads. And bear in mind, Andrew, that 96% of heads say, of primary schools, they don't want these assessments, these baseline assessments. They say we want our teachers with the children, encouraging them to understand why they're at school, what they can achieve and what they want and what they're interested in.
We'd all quite like not to have external assessments of what we do. But Camilla, Tominey, do we teach too much? I think the points are that because this helps decide where schools are in league tables, that some schools teach to the test.
That's right.
That the test is given more importance. It's not really a test of the kid, it's a test of the school. And do we do too much of that?
But if the tests happen at the beginning of the child's school career in primary school, they can't teach to the test because the children are coming in.
I understand that.
I know of parents who are aware these assessments are happening and they are thinking, what are these questions? And they are preparing their little toddlers for these questions.
I've got 3 children under 10. And I've got a 5-year-old. And if my 7-year-old went through SATs last year, we didn't tell him about it, we didn't overplay it. He went through these assessments without even knowing really what they were. Nothing was said about it.
And he
didn't have any emotional baggage
about
it. My 5-year-old, if had to sit with an iPad, and we've got some other intel this week on whether 5-year-olds should be sitting with iPads, but and had to answer them questions, I think would probably embrace it.
Right,
I mean, the idea. It's funny, you see children down there. I would imagine that the most stressful thing to children would be dragged down to Parliament Square in the middle of an Extinction Rebellion protest with placards staged.
Well, they're in the city of London.
I'm sure they're having the time of their life. Don't worry about that.
I think
Scotland doesn't have these tests in primary school. I think I'm right in saying. Has that been a success?
No, but what we're looking at is in terms of
No, it hasn't
P1.
been a success.
Well, what we're looking at is, I'm not saying no, it hasn't been a success. I'm saying there's been P1 assessments. There's been a big debate around P1 assessments, actually. I think well, first of all, can I give a shout out to everybody who's starting their exams today, which start in Scotland, of course. But
Okay,
you want to give kids the best start in life. Now, next month, John Swinney's commissioned a report, which will come out next month, looking at the best way to assess those P1s. And Camilla's right in a way, you know, kids don't know, but what you want to do is to find out what their needs are at the earliest possible stage. Now, with the previous proposals with the Scottish Government to look at that, which have now gone into this report, Labour and the Conservatives were against them.
By P1, you mean primary one?
Primary one, I beg your pardon, yeah, for primary one.
But just to be clear, you don't do these SATs tests in Scotland at the moment. My question was, if you don't, has that been a success? Has that produced a better primary system than England and Wales? What's the answer?
Look, I don't want to say it's a better system, and I also don't want to preempt this report that's going to come out next month. And I think that's sensible that when that comes out in May, we have a proper debate and discussion, because getting this right for kids when they start primary school is critical for their success, not just in primary school, but also when it comes to sitting their exams.
But you don't do these tests, and it would seem from the latest figures, before you stop publishing these figures, that in Scotland things have got worse. The proportion of those in primary 4 who performed very well or well when it came to numeracy was 76% in 2011, 64% in 2015. The proportion of those by secondary 2 who were writing well or very well had fallen from 64% to 49%.
Well, look,
why?
This is one of the areas we're looking at. Is you've got Deputy First Minister who's looking at this issue, commissioned a report to come back next month.
You've been in power for 12 years.
Hold on. One of the areas that they wanted to improve on was in this and getting it right straight away.
Why are
Labour,
these
the
figures
Conservatives
falling?
didn't want it.
You've been in power for 12 years and the figures are falling.
Well, then surely, if you're in power and you're wanting to look at this and you're wanting to make a difference, you look at those reports, but also you try and engage with colleagues from other political parties.
I'll just ask you
in a
one more
parliament
time.
of minorities, that is a sensible and right thing to do.
Why are they falling?
Well, that's something that I'm sure we'll get more answers to in May of next month. As I said, I don't want to preempt that report, but look, you can always do better on these areas,
Well,
and that's why
lost their opportunity.
That's nonsense. There are more kids coming out of schools with qualifications and going on to higher education than there have been previously in Scotland. So the end product has been very, very positive.
All right. We need to move on. We've got a busy programme, a lot of things to cover. A little bit of Brexit news. Tom Newton-Dunn, the political editor of The Sun. Andrea Leadsom, he is tweeted. She is the leader of the House, decides the House's schedule, what it debates, what bills it receives, confirms there's no plan to introduce the withdrawal agreement bill to the Commons next week. He puts in brackets yet. I guess it could change. This is confirmation that Number 10 still has no idea how to build a majority for it. It leaves just 3 weeks to pass it before May the 23rd Euro elections. And he adds TikTok. I don't know whether that's a sign off or a clock. Anyway, TikTok, there it is. No plans. We've had the Easter break. And so far, nothing has changed. At least as far as we can see. Let's move on to buses. Because Labour has made a number of announcements on buses. It has a number of policies, and we're going to look at some of them in a minute. It's going to reverse the cuts that it says have been made, and it wants to expand new bus services. But let me begin with the Conservatives. Why have the Conservatives allowed our bus services to deteriorate so badly in the past 9 years?
I think there's two things that are happening. First of all, you've got to segment the problem. The first is within cities and make sure that we have the buses can run, everyone can rely on them, they know they're on time and they're cleaner. That's happening quite well. Where you're getting a bigger problem is in rural areas, and I represent a rural area. And what happens is a catch-22. You've got these massive buses that are going from place to place, not very often, like once or twice a day, not providing a service that fits the need. If you want to get to work and back, it doesn't run at the right time. And then they do a consultation, find out that nobody's using the bus, and therefore they get rid of the bus, and then people are stranded without the bus. That is the model that has been in place, and it's completely wrong.
Well, it's the model you've presided over. Bus coverage is now at a 30-year low. Passenger journeys are down 10% under your government. There's also been a 32% rise in bus fares. Bus fares have risen 2.5 times faster than wages. Now, that matters because people who use buses, they tend to be, not entirely, but they're people on average wages, sometimes lower than average
remember,
wages.
the last day of the week
and you've cut government support by £645 million a year, in real terms. I ask again, why have you allowed our bus services to deteriorate?
So we put 1 billion into the concessions, and we put 250 million into subsidising routes. A lot of the cuts that you're talking about will be through the local authorities. Local authorities will be
No, this was government
decisions.
support is down 645 million per year in real terms since 2010.
Per year in real terms. OK, well, that's not the figures that I have, actually, in terms of the subsidies for the buses, because most of the subsidies for the buses come through, most of them come through local authorities.
Well, we can argue about the amount if you want, but you've cut the money, right?
Right, but here's the thing. What we don't have is the right bus service. So you could do two things. You could say, right, what we're going to do is put 1.3 billion back, I think that's what they've said, to subsidise all these buses that you will still find massive buses going from village to village with virtually no person on, not having the right service to get people to work on time. And the base problem, and what we're consulting on in certainly my area in West Sussex, is to find the right bus service for the future. And it really is something like the community buses, an Uber bus kind of system, a more on-demand system, and then we need to invest in the right bus services. What is happening is people
what is happening now is you're not investing.
Well, people aren't using them. If you are representing a place like Chichester, you will see go from village to village a lot of
Tracy, I need to come to
sorry, Gillian. People aren't using them because they can't afford them.
They're not fit for
They can't afford them. And certainly,
Right.
I would say this is probably one of the most exciting announcements of this week for me, because I've been a massive bus campaigner, because my community has been devastated by these cuts, where there are companies putting profits over people every which way. I mean, £330 million profits, and we are still losing. You know, we've lost 3,000
Who's that you're
routes.
talking about?
Well, the bus companies making that sort of profit, and it's all going to shareholders and not to where it's needed.
So you're going to put 1.3 billion back into the bus services. You're going to do that by reverse. Hold on, I'm asking a question. You're going to do that by reversing the cuts on about 3,000 routes, and you're going to expand new bus service routes. 1.3 billion. How will you pay for that?
That's from vehicle excise duty, and that's certainly that's 7.1 billion. And
Well, it will be by 2021.
Yes, that's right.
But that money is already allocated. So if you're going to take the 1.3 billion out, you're also going to bring the buses back into public ownership.
Well, it will be phased in. And
how much will that cost?
And certainly taking the whole bus service into public ownership, I don't have that figure.
So you don't know on that. And you're going to give free bus fares for the young.
Under 25-year-olds.
How much will that cost?
Well, that's part of the whole package. Obviously, it depends how many under 25-year-olds
right, but
there
you
will
must
be
have
at the time when we go into government.
You said you're very proud of this policy. So you must have, if you add all these up, reversing the cuts, expanding new, bringing buses back into public ownership, free bus passes for the under 25s, what's the total package cost?
Well, we have to also factor in of the total package that we will also be making more money by getting more people to use buses and to engage in these services. I think part of the problem is that I understand what Gillian's saying, that it's actually not working because local authorities have to pick up the slack of the services that aren't used so much. But what's happened is local authority funding cuts, and certainly my own local authority in Kirklees, you know, we've seen 60p in the pound be cut. That they have now said, well, we can't do those services.
You could end up spending the whole of the vehicle tax of 7 billion on all this, couldn't you?
Well, part of that is also about road repairs and road building.
How can you do it all? How can you do the road repairs and all this?
Well, it's massive ambition for the bus services.
But you've only got 7 billion.
I know that people in the south are sniffy about buses, but it's
Not at all.
Not at all. We want to know how you're going to make it a success.
Well,
we're not sniffy about buses at all. We want to know how you're going to do it all.
Well, we've definitely allocated. Obviously, the figures for the whole of the service aren't at my fingertips, but I would absolutely say that our announcement of the 1.3 billion is to be applauded.
If it's
we're
not
going
funded,
to have
it can't be applauded.
we're going to have to let Tracy go.
Yes, thank you.
Because I know you're going to meet these 4-year-olds and their parents protesting about the primary school testing. So goodbye.
Thank you. Cheers.
As we move on, we're going to look at the crime statistics announced this morning. And they don't make very happy reading. Let's just take two of them. In 2018, this is for England and Wales has come out. Scotland, Northern Ireland do their own separate police recorded crime. And this is recorded crime, police crime as recorded by the police. 2018, there were just under 41,000 offences involving knives or a sharp instrument. That's up 6% on the year before. And there were 732 cases of murder or manslaughter in 2018. That's up 12% on 2017. It's the highest level for homicides since 2008. And interestingly, 4 in 10 of these homicides involve knives. So they're related. The Conservatives used to be the party of law and order. Why have you lost that?
Well, there's no doubt that there has been a serious increase in knife crime. Absolutely no doubt. In most areas, actually with the exception of Sussex, for some reason, has had the largest fall in knife crime since 2010, but I still don't understand why. But there is no doubt that there has been a serious increase in knife crime, and there is no doubt that it needs a serious response. Right. So there's a number of reasons that people will put to it, and probably it's a combination of all of them. Obviously, you know, there's obviously the youth culture, gang culture, but there's also a lot of discussion about stop and search and whether that's had an impact or not, about police numbers, whether that has an impact or not. And I think there's probably a combination of factors. The reality is now what the Home Secretary has done is he's convened this group together to say we have to take a multi-agency approach and we have to work together to solve this problem.
I'll come back to so-called multi-agency approaches and so on. I mean, you've been in power since 2010. Let me come to Camilla here. Isn't this, I mean, put aside the crime issue, which is huge, and some of the figures are quite frightening, but isn't this also just terrible politics for the Conservative Party?
Yeah, I mean, it's a key plank of their entire kind of manifesto and what they are about, to say they're the party of law and order. And I think the relationship between the Conservatives and the police is tricky, and this idea that Theresa May has had this difficult relationship with the police after she gave that famous speech at the Police Federation conference, basically saying, you know, your money's being cut, that forever continues to haunt her. And I think you'd always have seen kind of the police aligned with the Tories in the past and feeling supported. There's been a lot of negative press about the police, and are their priorities in the right place, and are they empowered enough? And I think that does rub off on the youth culture of today. Have their budgets been cut too much? Well, have their budgets been cut, but also do they feel they play a less powerful role because they haven't got the tools at their disposal to crack down on crime? And then you have a situation where you do have youngsters involved in gangs, and we've seen videos that go viral of like communities banding around the criminal that the police is chasing, and the police just being laughed at by teenagers. I mean, I grew up living in fear of the police and getting into trouble with the police, probably because I was a child of the 80s, and we don't want to go back to those days. But at the same time, as the pendulum swung too far, and police are just walking around as if they're kind of community support officers meant to be supporting climate change rebels rather than anything else.
One violent crime is always one too many, but obviously you've seen that reduction in Scotland since the SNP came to power. Now, part of that was 1,000 extra police, and part of it was treating it like a public health issue as well. And one thing that's been
wasn't that
promising,
the Glasgow initiative?
Well, and it was a Glasgow initiative. But
not for the whole of Scotland.
Can I try and say something positive about this?
Can I just check though? But are you saying that violent crime in Scotland overall is falling now?
Well, we've seen a reduction in violent crime.
No, so you are saying that. Are you saying that violent crime in Scotland has fallen?
Well, we've seen that reduction in knife crime.
That's not what I'm asking. But look, what I asked was because we've seen violent crime. I mean, violent crime is up 19%. Are you saying that is not that violent crime is falling in Scotland?
No, but look, what we're
you're not saying
is,
that?
look, we're seeing progress in this. And can I say it? I want to say
what
something,
is the progress?
Andrew, I want to say something positive, which is I've been pleased to see the Mayor of London and also the government down here as well talking about taking some of those lessons from Scotland. Now, we will sit and argue about things, but you know, and I will disagree with the Conservative Party approach, and the Conservatives will disagree. But I think with learning from one another is one of the areas where devolution can work. But actually, when there are different governments who have taken different approaches to things, sometimes we can have that crossover and learn from each other where we're prepared to do so.
I am trying to learn, and what I'm trying to find out is violent crime falling in Scotland?
What was it? It's taking it as a public health issue. It's been something that's crucial, and also taking 1,000 extra police officers.
Is it or isn't it falling?
Well, what we're seeing is we've seen a reduction in that knife crime, and we're seeing a reduction
Glasgow.
in crime in the public health issues. But Glasgow was an area where there was a particular problem in 2007, and it's right that the Scottish Government tried to tackle that.
You know, before we can learn lessons, we need to know the facts, and I'm not getting them. I'm coming back to England and Wales. I'll get the facts. I'll give them over again. 41,000 knife crimes, the highest since 2008-9. In some areas, it's up 35%. Homicides up 6%. Violent crime up 19%. It's the kind of crime that worries most people. 1.6 million offences, the highest for over a decade. Robberies up 11%, the highest since 2008. Overall, police recorded crime up 7%, the highest since 2004. So I guess I come back to, in what way can your party ever claim with that record to be the party of law and order?
Well, can I just say, you make it sound like the Wild West running through that, but actually you are very unlikely to suffer a violent crime in this country. And compared to internationally...
That's always been true.
It's always been true, and it's still true. I just want to reassure people that it is still true. Yes, and so...
By the way, in some of our cities, it is a bit like the Wild West.
Well, there has been, and there are increases in knife crime in particular areas, and there's been money now put to specific projects in London, Manchester and Birmingham to try and address those. But
100 million overall.
100
but the
200...
cut to police in real terms is 10, 15 times
As we
that.
speak, the police and crime commissioners are recruiting 3,500 new police. If I speak to my own police and crime commissioner and say, you know, have you lost police? Have you got a problem with police numbers? They say, no, we've just recruited a new number. I think it differs in different areas for sure, but they are recruiting at the moment 3,500 more police officers. And I think in terms of the public health approach, I think learning from what has happened in Scotland and Glasgow, every government should learn from other governments inside and also abroad, but also in terms of other forces. We have 43 forces. I'm not sure that that's the right picture, and we should have it, you know, laid out the same anymore in terms of the type of crime they're tackling. And many are calling for those to be federated in different ways and to work in different ways. But to learn from others, there are differences across the country in how police are A, dealing with the resources they have, and B, tackling the crime they have.
But
and I think it's important.
Here's the rub, Camilla. I come back to this. We have a Prime Minister who was Home Secretary for 6 years, the longest serving Home Secretary in modern times. Home Office at the heart of crime issues. She's now the Prime Minister. This government has been in power for 9 years now. And yet all the figures show a deterioration. How can the Tories, you know, grab this back? The record speaks against them.
By changing policy. And also, equally, you have a situation which was politically very embarrassing of Cressida Dick Commissioner on one hand saying, yes, of course, police numbers and the cuts to police numbers are linked to knife crime, in direct contradiction of Mrs May. And that's problematic. And I think anybody, frankly, out on the street sort of can do the basic maths and suggest that if there are fewer coppers, then there's going to be more crimes.
So
and
will
more
3,500 new ones, the question really is that going to be enough? Will they get to the right places enough? And but that's where we need to put the you know,
and if you speak to police officers, not only have they got, I've got a number of friends actually, women at school, mums at school that have left the force because it no longer works for them, it no longer works for their life and their children. You've got this situation, it's almost decade in education, where you've got people leaving the force in record numbers and they're not being replaced quickly enough.
And I think that is a significant,
I think it's a significant problem.
I'm going to interrupt, but you'll like what we're coming on to because it's Nicola Sturgeon. And Nicola Sturgeon speaking in the Scottish Parliament, talking again about a second Scottish referendum. Let's listen to what she had to say.
To rush into an immediate decision before a Brexit path has been determined would not allow for an informed choice to be made. However, if we are to safeguard Scotland's interests, we cannot wait indefinitely. That is why I consider that a choice between Brexit and a future for Scotland as an independent European nation should be offered in the lifetime of this Parliament. If Scotland is taken out of the EU, the option of a referendum on independence within that timescale must be open to us.
Nicola Sturgeon, it's a bit of a rite of spring now, this, isn't it? Come the spring, the First Minister talks about another referendum, but it never happens.
To be fair to the First Minister, she did say, well, we will wait to see what Brexit looks like when the government have got a plan for Brexit. So I'm not sure she can be entirely blamed for that.
But in the spring of 2017, she pledged there would be a second referendum in 2 years.
Yes, she did.
What happened to that?
Because we were told that the government would have a plan. What Nicola's always been very clear about is that people deserve to be given a choice. We're about to go through the most profound changes that will impact everybody for decades, whether you believe in leaving the EU or not, whether you believe in independence or not. This is a profound juncture in UK politics. And at that profound juncture, we've got issues like austerity impacting on the public services issues that we've just been discussed, our relationship with Europe that's taking away the rights and opportunities that I had when I was growing up.
Right.
It's right that people should be given a choice.
So why don't the Scottish people agree with you?
Well, as you see, if you look at the polling, well, first of all, if you look at the polling, we've not even started an independence campaign, and we're within touching distance.
I'm talking about the appetite
and
for
if you look at a no deal,
referendum.
Andrew, and as you'll have seen, and the latest that compares the Prime Minister's deal with independence or no deal with independence, which are the most likely scenarios at the moment, you see that push in favour of independence.
But the latest poll, Survation poll, showed that only 1 in 5 Scots want a second referendum by Nicola Sturgeon. No, by May 2021.
No, they were saying
by 2021. That's when they wanted
and then there were others who were saying it should be considered as well. Actually, if you look down into those Survation numbers,
60%. I did 60%.
And you'll see the numbers that have gone up.
60% said they don't want one for another 5 years.
And people,
60%.
And people want a choice when we know what's going to happen. This will have a profound impact. Why should I vote to take away rights and opportunities that I've had? Now, one thing that's been really interesting is we seem to be having an old debate. We know that Scotland and the rest of the UK will be worse off outside the European Union. It'll cost folks jobs, it'll cost the economy. Why should we not give the people the opportunity to avoid that? Or should we go down the UK government's route and that we're all going down
so
when we hit the iceberg?
Why is there not a huge public appetite? If you're right, as opposed to being SNP management, which is what Nicola Sturgeon seems to be up to, why is there not now a huge majority for independence and a huge majority for a second referendum? Because you know in both cases there isn't.
Well, do you know what? Nicola is setting out and wants that independence referendum, and the right thing to do, and the right thing to do is put the legislation in place. The other thing she's doing, and I'd be really interested to hear Gillian's remarks on this, is she's engaging with the other political parties and say, look, if you don't want independence, how does devolution work for you? We know what we want. We know how best to give the people of Scotland a lifeboat from this disaster.
Let's see what the message is next spring. Let's have a message from David Lidington. Theresa May's de facto deputy was earlier asked if the Prime Minister could count fully on his support. This is what he had to say.
When I sit with her in the morning meetings at Number 10, I sometimes, if there's a set of bad headlines, I'm thinking to myself, how on earth do you motivate yourself to come in and face this every morning? But actually, you want to understand Theresa May, she's motivated by a deeply old-fashioned but absolutely true sort of British and Scottish sense ethic of public service.
What do you make of that?
I think she is a public servant. I mean, she's a vicar's daughter that has been brought up from the very beginning thinking of others and as a public servant.
As Prime Minister?
I think she should. I don't actually think. The one thing, I mean, I'm sure Camilla will have a different view. You know, I love the cartoon today, I think it was in the Times, which had Boris, you know, plan A, plan B, as though one person makes all the difference. This is about leaving a 45-year-old relationship without upsetting the economy and jobs. This is a very difficult thing to do. Nobody's ever done it. It has to be done properly, and she's doing it in the way that
it's becoming so toxic to the brand now, and we've spoken to MPs who have been canvassing on the doorstep for the local and the Euros.
I had a lot of sympathy shown for her.
Yeah, I don't know whether that sympathy vote is evaporating slightly.
It wasn't last week in Chichester.
Previously, she's described as a trooper, but one man's resilience is another person's obstinacy.
That's true.
That's it for Politics Live for today. I'll be back on BBC One with This Week Tonight with Pamela Anderson.